What is the most unexpected thing you found out about someone you know? Story 1. My mom got a full-ride scholarship offer to MIT out of high school but couldn't attend because her father refused to fill out the paperwork. He didn't want his ex-wife to know how much he was making in case she filed for more child support for my mom's little brothers. My mom would be a married stay-at-home mom to 2 by the time she was 21, but later in life pursued her education and became a computer programmer. I found her MIT acceptance letter tucked into a random book when I was in high school. Answer: I was accepted to a prestigious school, super low acceptance rate, in a different city. My dad didn't want me to go because it would cost him more to pay room and board. Tuition was the same. I ended up going to a good school in my city and stayed at home. I still remember my dad's comment that it is cheaper to feed an extra mouth than funding my expensive education in a different city. I turned out okay, but I sometimes think how different my life could have been. Story 2. While cleaning out my aunt's house that had recently passed away from dementia, we found out that she had secretly donated most of her wealth to dementia and Alzheimer's disease research organizations. The first donations began over a decade before she let anyone know of her diagnosis, which means that she was aware of her condition and quietly suffered long before anyone knew. It broke my heart, but also made me proud of her for her generosity and courage. Story 3. My Phil passed suddenly after routine heart surgery. We found out he was paying the bills of some stripper for about 20 years. She was 40 years old now. We're talking gym, rent, dental, vet bills for her cats, phone, car. The only reason we found out was because she called his niece expecting the family to continue paying her bills because he'd probably want us to take care of her. LOL. Answer: we had the same situation happen when my father passed away. The woman he was supporting was 2 years younger than me. She also had 2 kids and an abusive ex who was locked up in jail. When my dad was hospitalized, we couldn't find his car. We filed a stolen vehicle report. Turns out she had the car. As a matter of fact, we later found out that she was with my father when he had a massive stroke and brain bleed. He was with her at the time, and she was the one who called 911. But she left once he was taken to the hospital. I just happened to spot his vehicle on a random street near my job while he was still in the hospital. I didn't know it at the time, but she lived around the corner from my job. Of course, I had an extra key to his car, so I went home to get my fiance, and we went back and picked up the car. Of course, she thought it was stolen and began to call my dad's phone nonstop. That's when we found out about her. She had the audacity to ask my mother for money if she wanted the other key back. She never once asked how my dad was doing. She just wanted confirmation that her bills would be paid. Well, he died, and when it was clear that we weren't going to pay her, she agreed to give us the key if we let her come to the funeral. This was during COVID, so funeral homes were very backed up, and it took about 3 weeks for us to bury him. The entire time she would blow up my oldest sister, my mother, and I's cell phones asking us to pay her bills or send her money from my dad's account. She even found out where I worked and came to my job. Needless to say, we didn't tell her anything about the funeral, and I had to call the cops on her. Story 4. My brother died in November, went to his house 3,000 miles away, and found out he was a serious prepper. He cans upon cans of food, like over 200 cans of sardines, and hundreds of bottles of beans and other things he canned himself. Some were so old they were exploded. No rotation whatsoever. Story 5. I met an old guy through geocaching. He was in his 80s. He knew I was a car guy and drove a Porsche and was into watching auto racing. About 5 years after meeting him, he casually mentioned he used to also have a Porsche and raced it, was a crew chief for a bunch of IMSA race teams, and 1 year his driver won the championship, and he was invited to the Porsche factory for their yearly driver celebration. He also used to race NHRA and had a bunch of national records. Since then, we did 2 trips down to the Porsche Rennsport reunion at Laguna Seca. He passed away a few years back during COVID. R.I.P. Doug. Story 6. I work in dentistry, had a patient that was always pleasant and liked chatting during our appointments. Found out that he has an estranged son who he cut out of his life completely for being gay and has had nothing to do with him since. Couldn't look at him the same after that and secretly judge him harshly. Story 7. My best friend lived across the street from me when we were kids. I knew his parents pretty well. When the dad died, I learned from his obituary that he fought in the Battle of the Bulge in WW2 and ended the war as a guard at Nuremberg, Germany during the Nazi war crimes trials. He never discussed this. Answer: my uncle was also a guard at Nuremberg. He bought an autograph book and asked all the Nazi prisoners to sign it. Not all of them did, but we went through the book together and he told me what he remembered about each man. I was just a kid, but I knew I was listening to history. He eventually wrote down a bunch of his memories, and I'd like to think our conversations inspired him. Likely he was already doing it, but I did get a copy of his memoir. Story 8. I dated someone in my 20s that told me her mom was takedown. Just wait. When we then talked about her dad, she told me that when she was 6, she told her dad that her mom was having a friend that was a man come over when he wasn't home. The dad then strangled the mom to passing. Needless to say, she struggled with anger and guilt issues. Story 9. I found out my stepmom at the time was a white-collar criminal under investigation when our house was swatted and she committed tragic end a few weeks later. Upon reflection, we had some nice things and went on some nice vacations that were on dirty money. Story 10. My old neighbor, Mr. Henderson, was the ultimate get-off-my-lawn guy. He was 70-something, lived alone, and would literally complain if your car idled for more than 30 seconds. I just assumed he'd lived a tiny, boring life as a typesetter. He passed away a few years ago, and since he didn't have family nearby, a few of us helped his nephew clear out the house. We found a heavy wooden crate buried in the back of a closet under some old blankets. Turns out the guy was a total legend. He'd been a bush pilot in the 70s, flying solo missions into war zones in Africa to drop off medical supplies on dirt strips that barely counted as runways. We found medals, flight logs, and photos of him basically dodging anti-aircraft fire. It really put things in perspective. The guy I judged for being obsessed with his hedges had spent a decade in a cockpit saving lives in high-stress environments. I guess when you've dealt with that much noise and chaos, you just want to come home and enjoy the silence. Story 11. My uncle was a Medal of Honor recipient from World War II. Nobody in the family knew until a full USMC honor detail showed up unexpectedly at his funeral. Whenever anyone asked about his service, all he ever said was, "Nothing special. I just fought like everyone else." My aunt probably knew, but she never said anything and passed away a few years before he did. Story 12. I've got 2. In my early teens, I found out my oldest brother was actually my half-brother, which he only found out in his late 20s. Then I worked with a coworker, and we became close, like sisters. After I left, she shared that she and her husband are like secret multi-millionaires. His family is wealthy, and they have good investments. They both work very hard, might I add, to set a good example for their kids. She told me they could never work another day and still have wealth. I would have never known. LOL. Story 13. When I was growing up, my maternal grandma was always in a nursing home and spent a lot of her life in a mental hospital. She was always a bit off and would say things like, "The devil makes you fight with your sister," and such. As a grown-up, me and my mom were talking, and she told me that her mom and her mom's dad, my mom's granddad, were estranged, and on his deathbed, he apologized to her, presumably for intimacy assaulting her. And supposedly that what caused her to have a breakdown and get committed when she was younger. This was when my mom was a young girl. Evidently, Grandma was pretty normal mom before that. My mom ended up having to be the woman of the house for her dad, cooking and cleaning and such. When she got old enough to go to college, her dad fought her quite a bit about going because no one was going to be around to take care of him. She went on to join the Navy and become a nurse. I guess later on he was like super proud of her, but in the beginning it was a lot of shouting to just be able to leave the home and go to school. Story 14. My best friend of 25 years told me about 6 years ago that he had been shoplifting since we were teens. That at first it was because he couldn't afford stuff, and then later, just because he could. I always wondered how he had so many movies and collectibles on a student's budget. He would say he traded this for that, or he got it from a friend or whatever. The truth was, he stole all of it, and often resold it too. Back in our late teens, I was working at a book and music store, and he wanted me to put in a good word for him. And for some reason, that made me uncomfortable. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I just knew he wouldn't be a good employee and/or would get into trouble. And the instant he told me all of this, I knew that was the feeling I had. Since I had no idea he was stealing, I couldn't put a name to that feeling. But the minute he told me, I realized that I had a gut instinct that he was doing that. He's since gone to therapy and has stopped, but holy shoot. Story 15. My grandma's cousin flew Spitfires during the war. She was one of a few women in the RAF. Amazing woman, never married and lived in a little tiny village in rural Wales. At her funeral and helping clear at her house, we found out that she's been a spy in the 60s, 70s. It was lots of talk of MI5, MI6 travel to places that would have been very odd for a single woman to do on her own at that time, and lots of things that we're still not allowed to talk about. Story 16. My screenwriting professor, Peter Kywit, is doing time in Rochester, New York, because a child-adult worker, intimacy trafficked, minor and victim died in his hotel room from a heroin overdose. He became a child intimacy trafficker and hard substances dealer after I graduated. At least I hope it was after. Look him up. He's a POS edit, strike-through reword. Answer: I appreciate this sounds pedantic, but there is no such thing as a child-adult worker. Only children exploited and abused for intimacy. I pointed out because the term is rightfully dying out from legal and academic vernacular, but needs to be phased out of common parlance. It's important because child-adult worker suggests a child can consent to an exchange of money for intimacy, which of course they cannot do. Story 17. I found out that a friend of mine, a stuntman, was a mercenary who rescued hostages from certain countries where, if he had been caught, he would have been eliminated. I found this out when my friend hired him to rescue her daughters, who had been kidnapped and were being held hostage in a closed, powerful kingdom in the Middle East. He walked in and I said, "What are you doing here?" "I didn't know you knew my close childhood friend." He said, "I'm the guy they hired. This is what I do." What? I knew him from a completely different life and was stunned to see him in my childhood town at all, much less for this. Yes, he rescued them. Story 18. That my sweet grandmother, when she was in her late teens, early to mid-1900s, married a much older WW1 vet. He died a couple years later. She never told anyone. After this, she was in some sort of a relationship with a very prominent, wealthy, married Jewish businessman. She was Catholic, in the Deep South, and got pregnant with my dad. She very quickly got married to another man who ultimately gave me my surname. That man left her 2 years later with my dad and another infant boy. She remarried again in the 60s only after the man whose last name I still have died. The last man she married was blind, homosexual, and outlived her by a few years. She had a very hard life. Edit. Forgot to mention the man who fathered my dad was married to someone else. Grammar. Answer. My great-grandmother didn't know for certain who her father was. Apparently something happened with her mother and a supervisor at the mill where they worked when she was young, and so she never said anything about it. I'm sure there wasn't much she could do at that time, and there would have been shame on her even still. It makes me rage to think about. Story 19. I had known my great-grandfather fought in WW1, but it wasn't until my 20s that I learned he participated at the Battle of Vimy Ridge. It was the first major victory for all of the divisions of the Canadian Corps working together. It is famous enough that almost all Canadians know about it. France even dedicated part of the land around the Vimy Memorial to Canada. Is considered a Canadian national park. Got a chance to see it when I was younger. It is a very awe-inspiring place to visit. Answer. I apologize for hijacking, but there are so many noteworthy things associated with this battle, and your great-grandpa was a part of this. Just to add to the story and Gigi's contribution, this was what many consider the moment that Canada became its own country. Up until this point, they were very much seen as a colony and nothing more, like many others. We answered the call, but where the British, French, and others failed, Canada succeeded and became its own. This is also the battle where, allegedly, the concept of walking artillery fire up to your enemy to create an avenue with your infantry following behind was invented. The Canadians were often cited by enemy as fearsome and relentless, which in some cases caused Geneva Conventions, but they were also considered to be fearsome soldiers to be respected and avoided due to their skills, tenacity, and heart. I'm sure Shoelacy Suntide would agree, but if you ever get a chance to see Vimy Ridge, it is amazing, and you can absolutely see why it was such a priority for all armies to occupy. Story 20. I found out the man that my aunt married had actually taken down his wife in front of his children. It was premeditated too. He had to go out and get the gun, came back and shot her in the head in front of his son and daughter. Also shot her friend. That wasn't really the craziest part. I went online and Googled the crime and realized the timeline of my aunt's marriage didn't make sense. It was way too soon after he'd gotten out of prison. Turns out they were courting while he was locked up. Never looked at her the same after that. I come from a pretty solid family on my mom's side. No criminal records, all pretty low drama with decent careers, good heads on our shoulders. So it was really out of character for someone to do that. Story 21. I found out my grandparents were actually Jewish after they passed away, and my aunt was cleaning out their house, and she found a bunch of letters between my grandpa and a local rabbi. Not mind-blowing by most standards, but it was for us, since they put up a very convincing front as devout Catholics since coming to Australia. They fled Ukraine during WW2 and never felt safe enough to openly practice their faith. My family isn't religious, but we do a Hanukkah menorah every December in their memory. Answer, my coworker found out she's actually Jewish after giving birth to her son at the age of 39. Her partner is a Moroccan Jew, and they took their son to a local shul as per the request of her Phil. There, Rabbi asked her if she was Jewish. The answer was no. Rabbi further asked her about her mother's side of the family, who came from the Netherlands. The rabbi noted her mother's last name and promised her that he would get back to her after some research. Her mother's grandmother was actually born in Romania in a Jewish shoe business family, and many died of some virus or something, and a few who were alive migrated to Western Europe, escaping the deadly flu. She's happy to find that out, but as a staunch atheist, she has no desire to practice any religion or identify herself with any. Story 22. My grandfather abandoned his pregnant girlfriend just before meeting my grandma. But don't worry, my grandma lied about being pregnant to get him to marry her, then faked a miscarriage, then held swinger parties at their house while he was away for work. So karma, I guess? Story 23. My uncle was from Italy. I learned after he died that he used to be an alcoholic, likely due to trauma. His family left Italy in the 40s and took his older brother and left him in Nazi-occupied Italy during all of that alone. He apparently went through things but never spoke about them. Story 24. I had a friend basically go crazy on me about 20 years ago to the point I had to end the friendship. I had started a project and she wanted to be a part of it, but her erratic behavior basically blew everything up. I've always wondered how much I was responsible for what happened, but she clearly had problems. Fast forward 15 years, and she reached out to me, and I reluctantly let her back into my life. And while we're nothing like we were before, we are getting more comfortable together. Anyway, a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about substance addiction, and she casually tells me she was addicted to oxycodone during that period. I had no idea, and frankly, it explains a lot. Story 25. My mentor was a brilliant, encouraging woman. I owe everything to the opportunities she gave me because they were not generally offered to people early in my field, and the experience catapulted my career. 3 years into working with my mentor, I found out that she was a recovered alcoholic, that she'd veered off the road one night and had eliminated someone. By the time I started working for her, she had been out of prison for several years, but people kept their distance from her and were reluctant to work with her on projects. She lived a very quiet life. Suddenly, it made sense to me how she could devote herself so wholly to the work. It's a very strange thing to know that someone important to you has done something horrible. There were many people who thought the worst of me because I continued working for her after I found out. A court had already judged her. I didn't think I needed to as well. Story 26. This is horrible, but my daughter was casual friends with a girl on one of her HS sports teams. The girl's dad was super nice, friendly, helpful, easy to talk to. The daughter was very bright and polite, totally the kind of kid you'd want your kid to hang out with, lovely, normal family. They even had a sleepover party for the team. I didn't think twice about letting my daughter go. A year later, the dad was arrested. He'd been repeatedly RPing his much younger stepdaughter for years, starting when she was 6. He also had cameras set up in the poor girl's bedroom and bathroom and had been secretly recording her. He's currently serving 30 years, plea bargain down from 90. I no longer trust my ability to size people up. He's a total monster, and I thought he was a really nice man. Story 27. My ex-wife forced me to undergo extensive and painful medical procedures over the course of many years. It turns out she was lying about my diagnosis and wouldn't let me access my own medical records, so I didn't know until years after separating, found out over the summer. I've been in recovery from abuse for a few years, and the doctors started categorizing her behavior into some alarming buckets. So I found out I married a real-life psychopath. That's something. Story 28. That he could go from just a normal guy you hung out with, spent a lot of time with, and attended the same church with 4 years, who was considered a good friend you could trust, but then turn around and take down his girlfriend and his son, have a standoff with police, take and eliminate an innocent hostage, and then take his own life. Story 29. At my grandfather's funeral, I was not there, a woman showed up no one knew. Later after the ceremony, she walked up to my uncle and asked if he was her father. Turns out she was at home, and her mom's dad, her grandfather, was reading the paper, and my grandfather's obituary was in it. He told her, "This is your dad's father." She showed up hoping to meet him. He wasn't there. My father didn't go that day. Story 30. This is super mundane compared to some of these, but the tax professional we used to use for our annual nonprofit foundation audit had her computer with all her clients' files hijacked by ransomware and had to cough up a bunch of money to get the files back. I don't know why she confessed it to me, a lowly office manager. Story 31. When my great-grandma died, we found out that she had a kid that she'd given to her sister to raise. I wasn't allowed to go to the funeral or anything, but I think they did some sort of reading of the will or some letters she'd left behind or something. And apparently Grandma was hiding quite a bit, not just the sorry I gave you up because I didn't want you. It was an utter shoot show for years after her passing Omeo. She would have been 19 at the time, I believe. It's hard to pinpoint dates and things. Grandma wasn't a very reliable source, it turns out. And she was actually part of a biker gang or something. I found pics of their whole group together when cleaning her house out. I know she also got married in Jamaica around that time as well to another dude. So it seems like Grandma just didn't want a kid getting in the way of her party life. I'm told the actual letter or whatever they read was pretty cold and brutal about everything. Literally no one but Grandma's sister knew, and she'd already died years earlier. She was kind of a meanie the few times I met her TBH, but I can't imagine what it would be like to find out in your 70s that your entire life was a lie like that and that your mom wasn't your actual biological mother. Story 32. Just over a year into our relationship, my ex-boyfriend revealed he had a daughter that he was only allowed to see in a supervised court-appointed contact center. He also mentioned that he'd stopped going to see her there 4 years previously because he felt like she didn't like him enough, and he was like, well, I won't bother then. He wasn't a nice person in the end, so no wonder she didn't like him. But man, that was a fudge bombshell. We'd known each other as friends for over a year before we got together as well, so it was genuinely mental finding this out after 3 years of knowing him. Story 33. I didn't know my father was racist until I was an adult. He made sure to discuss racism and xenophobia with me. I still remember the day we discussed MLK and judging people on the content of their character, not the color of their skin. Then I grew up, and he started dropping in bombs and racist jokes. Story 34. Found out that my white grandfather taught at a school in Metro Cincinnati in the late 50s. Was the only white teacher at the school and never made it a point to flaunt or virtue signal about this, and our family didn't learn about this until going through some of my grandmother's things after she passed. Story 35. If you're Gen X of a certain age who grew up in northeastern Pennsylvania, you probably remember Uncle Ted from Uncle Ted the Ghoul School on TV on Saturday nights. Ted, his name was actually Edwin, also co-owned a magic shop with my next-door neighbor, who was a professional magician. I was very into magic as a kid, so I spent a lot of time there and knew him a bit. Turns out that Ted had been an absolute badass in WW2. From Wikipedia. During the Second World War, as a radio operator with the 82nd Airborne Division's 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment, Raub participated in D-Day and Operation Market Garden. According to author Cornelius Ryan's best-selling account of the battle, A Bridge Too Far, when tracer bullets began ripping through his canopy, Private Edwin Raub became so enraged that he deliberately side-slipped his chute so as to land next to the anti-aircraft gun. Without removing his harness and dragging his parachute behind him, Raub rushed the Germans with his Tommy gun. He eliminated one, captured the others, and then with plastic explosives destroyed the flak gun barrels. Story 36. I found out 15 years after my father's passing that he fathered a child before he even met my mother. It was when he was in the army in Germany. He left them behind but paid support until the mother wanted to get married and her fiancé wanted to legally adopt the child. That happened after he and my mother were married, and he never said a word. Story 37. I have a friend who acts very innocent. She would tell stories like, he looked at adult content. Adult content. Can you believe that? I really believed it until another friend said they had had a group scene with her and that it was far from her first time. They said in reality she's quite a freak in bed. I was so shocked that at first I thought I must be confusing two different people. I wasn't. Obviously, there is nothing wrong with consenting adults doing what they want to do with each other, but most don't conceal it so effectively with an act. It makes me trust her less. Story 38. I'm a musician. I play at church and in local bands around town. A gal whom I recognize that goes to our church was at a local show. She said she knew me from church, but also somewhere else. Turns out my wife and I opened our marriage briefly a few years ago, and she recognized us from a swinger app. Lo and behold, they are very active in the lifestyle. Good for them. Just crazy because they are so meek, quiet, and holy. Probably wouldn't be shocked to know my wife and I did that, but them, it's just crazy. Story 39. I found out in my mid-20s that my dad was an intense addict. I've only known my dad to be a wonderful and present father, so this was a surprise to me. As far as my memories go, my dad has always been in my life, but I know there was a time when my mom was very young and had to do it alone. I love both my parents equally, and it seems my dad has spent all of these years making up for hurting her, but it still makes me a little sad that they both struggled so young. I'm eternally grateful for the wonderful people they are today. Story 40. We had this older, very well-liked grandfatherly guy at work that everyone went to for help on complex issues. A couple years after he retired, he was arrested for multiple counts of child intimacy abuse and got sentenced to years in prison. Everyone was shocked. Story 41. My father was scouted for the Navy's nuclear program after serving his mandatory 4 years in Vietnam. I found this out when I was going through the cedar chest my mother kept with decades worth of stuff after he passed. We were looking for pictures of him when I came across it. He never took it because he felt like he was too stupid for the program, but also held onto it as proof that someone believed in dumb old him. It's a shame he never really felt comfortable applying it himself because he genuinely thought he was too dumb to do anything but work with kids and animals. It also proved to me that my father was as intelligent I always knew him to be. Story 42. Maybe not unexpected from some fact about them, but when my grandfather passed away, there were vehicles for miles, literally miles, in the funeral procession on the way to the cemetery. I knew he was respected in his little slice of nowhere, a township of like 200 people, but the number of people that showed up to pay their final respects is still mind-blowing to me all these years later. It was also like the final scene out of the movie Big Fish with the cast of characters that showed up. Story 43. I played an MMO with a guy who had been out of prison for about a year, I think, after having served 10 years. I was in my early 20s, and I believe he was in his late 30s, early 40s, but he was such a great chat and quite polite and respectful. Never once got creepy with me, a female player using voice chat compared to other younger guys. One evening, we were just talking about our lives and pasts, etc., while questing. His prison stint came up because of how much things changed and how much he missed. I was deeply curious because how did this seemingly very nice, calm, and well-adjusted person go to prison for that long? I encouraged him to tell me why, and I promised not to judge him. Apparently, one of his friends beat the shoot out of and violation his fiancée, and they couldn't get justice for it, so they decided they were going to just leave town and leave all that crap behind them. The day they were leaving, my MMO friend decided he wanted to look that bastard in the eye and say his piece. Unfortunately, he saw red and strangled the guy to passing. Instead of a crime of passion, it was considered premeditated. Story 44. I dislike that I know this, but apparently my dad has, at the very least, secret gay desires and, at the worst, a secret gay life. It makes me wonder what my deceased mother had to put up with. He's almost 90 and has dementia, so his internal sensor filter is broken. Dementia is known to do that and lower inhibitions, and so he has been vocal about some graphic stuff with the staff, and it's shocking and embarrassing, and, well, it just sucks because you can't even really talk to him about it because he won't remember that you did. Answer. I'm a nurse and I just wanted to maybe reassure you that it's highly unlikely he had a secret gay life. I've lost count of resident dementia sufferers who have made advances on staff of the same gender. An elderly woman attempted to make out with me only last week, in fact. The disease just knocks out inhibitions, personality, everything. It's horrid. I'm sorry you're having to navigate it. Story 45. My very sweet, kind-hearted aunt died last year from cirrhosis. Nobody in my large family had any idea she had a serious addiction except the husband, whom she threatened with divorce if he told anyone. It took my dad to recognize her symptoms of jaundice before the secret broke. She died 2 months after that. Found out her routine was to drink from water bottles filled with vodka that she sipped on all day. She was a school teacher for 30-some years, drove kids and grandkids around town, active with church stuff. Breaks my heart when I think about the demons this woman was facing. Story 46. I met Jen in my knitting group, and she said she was an accountant running her own business. Eventually, she shared that after she'd been laid off from her accountant job, she started a new phone intimacy business. She was able to afford fancy alpaca yarn by telling men they're sissies. Story 47. I used to work at this nonprofit on the fundraising team, and one of the biggest donors, always very overly involved, started getting real weird and manic out of nowhere, like calling all the time and acting really paranoid about something. Finally, after weeks of this, he told us, "Oh yeah, I'm on the Epstein list." Sorry guys. Story 48. That my suburban housewife mom had been busted for shoplifting and narrowly avoided jail, prison, time on a felony charge. I'd known about her shoplifting since I was a kid and eventually was banned from shopping with her because I would try and stop her. I knew she was not a kleptomaniac without impulse control, She just enjoyed the thrill of getting away with it. I lost track of her behavior in the ensuing decades, but apparently she just kept doing it without me there and was caught several times. One of the stores was biding their time for a felony charge, and she was 100 on track for incarceration. The only reason we ever found out is because my brother, a lawyer who was living at home at the time, thought her legal mail was meant for him and accidentally opened the letter about an upcoming court appearance. Apparently, the lawyer she'd been going to was also intimacy coercing her, and she just put up with it because she didn't want us to know that she'd been caught. Not sure what the plan was exactly, for her to just randomly go to jail one day out of the blue. Anyway, my brother took over and leveraged his law contacts to get her that highly reduced sentence, but she forbid him from telling me. She did her community service, not the therapy, and apparently just got away with it. She has since passed, and my brother eventually filled me in as a, "Oh yeah, we chose not to tell you," but sort of thing. But the whole situation was completely shocking and out of left field for me. Story 49. A guy I played in pool tournaments with, who was chill and nice, take down his GF by beating her to passing, who was his baby mama, and then tried to eliminate himself and his baby by driving off a cliff. He only eliminated his son. He is in prison now. He survived, of course. Story 50. I worked fast food when I was a teenager, and my best friend and I were some of the youngest people there. We would make up nicknames for many of our coworkers that for some reason were family-themed. Cousin Rich, Father James, Auntie Lauren, etc. As obnoxious as it seems, people really seemed to like it, and we were kind of treated like the kids, with the older adults and closing crew being protective of us. The employee who worked at the back window, who we called Uncle Mike, was someone that we would sing songs to and talk to a lot, and was just a really sweet, hardworking, and quiet guy in his 40s, 50s. One night we were closing with a new manager, and it was a skeleton crew of just my friend and I and the manager. At one point, the manager made a comment about how many employees worked there that they wouldn't want us to be alone with, and when we seemed confused, they explained about how many employees were ex-cons or on work release. They mentioned Uncle Mike as being one of them, and told us that he had done over 20 years in prison for takedown in the past. Apparently, he was a part of a gang in his young adult years on the West Coast, and at some point beat someone to passing as part of a gang-related fight. They also told us how many and which of our coworkers were on work release. It was shocking, as I would not have thought Uncle Mike capable of that, and didn't know that about our coworkers. Honestly, I wish they hadn't said anything. It definitely changed things, though the change was not intentional. We had worked with the crew for probably 2 years at least, and no one had ever been inappropriate with us. They treated us like their daughters or nieces. Story 51. Well, about 3 months ago, I found out that my partner of 12 years, now ex, and father of my 2 primary school-age kids was a predator after the police arrived one morning to arrest him and search the house. I was just getting the kids ready for school when 5 plainclothes officers descended on us, took him away, and explained that they had solid proof he had been communicating intimacy online with a 12-year-old, including exchanging photos. I told the arresting officer there and then to tell him that he disgusts me and I never wanted to talk to him ever again. He's currently on bail, living in a hotel, and hasn't bothered with our kids since because he would have to pay for supervised visits. Honestly, I'd rather he died. Story 52. Why does this story of mine fit more than half the questions on this subreddit? A close friend of mine told me shortly after we met that she was waiting until marriage and therefore had never slept with anyone, not even her boyfriend of almost 3 years at the time. I struggled to believe her for a while, but then we once talked about it, and she was speaking in hypotheticals and clearly had no idea what she was talking about, so that proved that she was a virgin. A couple days later, we were talking about random stuff, and somehow the topic of birth control came up, and she said, "I have no reason to be on birth control." I should add that she was trained to give fellow students advice about birth control and other safety methods, and it is one of her jobs on campus, but she has never needed to use them. The very next day after she said that, she lost her virginity. It was with that boyfriend. They were having a lot of issues in their relationship, and he was pretty much mentally checked out by that time. Retrospectively, I could tell. So she probably was desperate to do something to make things work. After all, she was convinced that she was going to marry him eventually. They did it while on a date, which took place literally right after she and I had dinner together at a campus cafeteria. Anyway, he told her the next morning that he disliked it, that he never wanted to do it again, and that it made him realize that he is asexual. She immediately broke up with him. I have never seen her more devastated than she was then. I did not find out for another month, and she actually did not want to ever tell anyone. But one time at lunch, she broke down and told me anyway. I was shocked, both because the guy did something so bad to someone that I care about so much, and because she seemed so committed to her values. Story 53. I didn't find out my best friend was blind in one eye until years into our friendship when she randomly asked me to drive at night because she couldn't see. Oh, by the way, can you drive right now? Because it got too dark and rainy, and now I literally can't see anymore. Story 54. An old colleague in a professional office setting who was much older used to try and invite me out to bars he was promoting. I never went because he gave me the creeps. Turns out about a year later, he was charged for driving girls across the province for a trafficking operation. Story 55. I had an older gentleman in all of my law classes at university and did lots of group projects and work with him for over 2 years. One day he casually dropped the bomb that he has been in prison for takedown for 20 years and got interested in the law due to his incarceration. Sir, what? Story 56. In my late grandfather's study and found a picture of him holding a man's head. The background appeared to be a jungle, and he was kneeling on the ground with the head in his hands and smiling. We learned he was a sniper in the Korean War, and this was how they confirmed the individual was dead. This man never raised his voice and was the most loving and amazing grandfather. Still shocks me to this day. Story 57. In college, after a semester or two, gal I had interest in invited me to a party where I met her pet raccoon named Squirrel, then found out she had failed her final exams and was moving back home about 2,000 miles away, which was the reason for the party. Squirrel was unexpected and totally awesome. Story 58. Found out my Mimi, paternal grandmother, was actually 3 months pregnant with my father when she married the man who became my granddad, but the baby was not his. My entire life I could feel how differently Grandpa treated my father versus my uncle, who also turned out not to be his biologically, but he never knew that, but never knew why until a few years ago. My father does not talk about it. It was my mother who told me, but darn Mimi kinda got around. Story 59. My ex, hetero-presenting toxic masculine, confided that he cheated on his girlfriend after me by bottoming in a 3, some with 2 other dudes with huge male body part. I would have never guessed this in my wildest ventures. Kept his secret for years, but feels good to say it here, LOL. Story 60. I knew a guy whose brother saved him from a burning car at 2 years old. He was pretty badly burned, over 90 of his body and disfigured, but still managed to live a pretty normal life during his teenage years and into his 20s with girlfriends and baby mamas and everything. Fast forward into his adult life, found out he went to prison for molesting his cousin down south in Alabama. He came back up north talking crazy, at first about Hollywood and demons and such. I figured he was having a mental breakdown. Then 2 months later, he was back to talking normal to people. A couple of months after that, my brother was driving his daughter home, and she confided in him that her dad was molesting her, telling her she was so dumb that no one else would ever want her, and even if they did, he would have to teach her everything she needed to know. He went back to prison, where he was beaten to passing. I always think about this when people are mourning the passing of children. It makes you think sometimes, just sometimes, maybe it's for a good reason. Story 61. I have a buddy that never went to college, never learned a trade or job skill of any kind, never owned a home, and doesn't have any investments. When he was over 40, him and his wife decided to have his first kid. When I asked him what made him change his mind, he mentioned some of our other friends that have kids and how it looked fun. So I mentioned, well, they all have money. He said, it's not all about money. I'm just as smart as them. For like 30 years, I thought we both knew he was an idiot. Turns out that wasn't the case. I'd call that unexpected. Story 62. My extremely kind and laid-back great-uncle was a chopper gunner in Vietnam and saw his friend's head explode a few feet away from him. I forget exactly why my dad told me, but when he did, I was dumb enough to ask, why has he never mentioned that before? Story 63. Got told this year by family, but my mum, uncle is a serial killer, was locked away for 16 years after his first eliminate. After getting released, he eliminate one more person and attempted to eliminate again after, and got a whole life order. It's just so fit to learn about it and how ficked my family, my mother's family, are. Story 64. One of my closest friends' son was suddenly arrested a few years back. He was a young married father of a 5-year-old who everyone thought was really close with his parents and appeared to be a model husband. Apparently, he'd been having an affair with a woman who had a 6-year-old, and he and the mom had arranged to traffic her daughter for intimacy. They were picked up in a big sweep of our area. I feel so bad for his parents and now ex-wife. He's an only child. Story 65. A woman that my ex-husband cheated on me with several years ago was convicted on charges of producing and distributing child adult content. She was somehow using Chatterbait to conduct her dealings, and her reach was apparently international, as Interpol was involved. My ex had such classy taste in women. Story 66. I had a group of guys I met as we all worked in the same profession. We're all recently out of college, and we developed a Friday happy hour group. We were all young paralegals in a major city, so financially we were all struggling, except for one guy. I knew what he did and where he worked, and knew his family wasn't rich. So one night after a few cups, I mentioned that if he has any tricks or secrets on good investments, he should let us in on it. I don't recall his exact words, but he said something along the lines of it's a settlement from some things that the priest did to me as an altar boy. I never brought it up again. Story 67. My mom's old boss seemed like a nice, average, older guy. She learned at his funeral he was in the Army. He always had a passion for making things, and the Army guys made fun of him so badly he eventually got out and joined the Navy instead. The Navy saw the potential in him, and he excelled designing things there. He eventually designed something to do with the guns on the ships, I think. It's been years, so I forget the specifics. And patented this. Spent a career there before going into my mom's field and quietly settling. He was a pretty humble guy, and no one at the company really knew this until he died. Story 68. I was adventurous in my youth and planned a MMF hookup with a new FWB. He had been seeing a guy for a short while who seemed keen on the idea as well. When FWB told me the guy's name, I did a double take. It was a unique name, and I knew who it was immediately. Let's call him Guy. The only thing is, Guy was the most homophobic, super masculine, hyper-aggressive alpha type, always telling our friends how many women he slept with, very loud and proud. He worked in a hyper-masculine job with lots of fighting and physical contact as well. Think boxing or football. FWB described Guy to me as the opposite of this. Shy, timid bottom type. So unexpected. Just the last person I would ever imagine being this way. Guy reached out to me privately to say that not only did he not want to sleep with me, as he is strictly gay, but also to never tell our friends. He pleaded so desperately it was terrible. I never did tell, but he did eventually move away and come out of the closet. Story 69. My dad and his siblings found out in their 40s that their mom used to work for the CI. She was doing paperwork and filing. Nothing crazy, but it was still a shock that she had never mentioned it before. After hearing that, they asked if there was anything else they should know. And with a laugh, she said, I have no more startling disclosures to make at this time. Story 70. For the life of me, I can't remember what branch my uncle served in, but he had told us he was ordered to listen to Sputnik and had to try to decipher the sounds for hidden codes. He said he had to listen to it for hours, and it was the most boring job he had ever had. Also that nothing came of it. Story 71. My regular did 25 years for takedown. He shot a guy for gleefully admitting not only that he'd molested his girlfriend's daughter, but that he also planned on doing it again. He doesn't regret it, and I don't think he should. And no, you would not think of this upon meeting him. Sweet guy. Story 72. My friend has 2 degrees, she's a social worker, and honestly, I think she could take down a maniac, 16-stone teenager in a heartbeat. I had no idea about her education, though. I knew she was intelligent, but she's like incredibly intelligent. She's very quiet, happy, chill, a quietly confident badass. Story 73. A good friend's father had biological children and adopted foster kids. I didn't know the details, but the girls always ran away once they became of age to be emancipated. Turns out he was abusing them and went on the run for a few years. Last I knew, he was doing his time somewhere in the Midwest. Story 74. My maternal grandfather got into university in the 1960s, which was a relatively big deal in our country at the time, but he had to drop out to work. Same with my father, just a couple of decades later. I only found out about it in recent years because neither of them ever mentioned it. Story 75. This childhood friend of my mom, who we knew socially over the years, had been a member of the Weathermen. He was serving time in Attica during the uprising. He was happy to talk about it if you asked, but it wasn't something he volunteered. I didn't understand it all until I was in college. Story 76. Casually found out my freshman HS teachers taught the Boston Bomber Brothers and had to be interviewed in the middle of the year because our history teacher had very creative but good way of helping us understand history. They were scared it had an influence later in their life. Whole time the brothers were quiet kids in HS. Story 77. I saw my supervisor at a work outing in a pair of shorts. His leg was scarred and looked mauled. When asked, he said that when he was a teenager, his family was on an African safari. While out of the vehicle at a stop, a young lion sprang from the bush, grabbed him by the leg, and was dragging him away. The tour operator shot the lion, saving my boss's life. He told the entire story rather nonchalantly, and I have no reason to even think his explanation untrue. Story 78. After being told to make myself at home at a girlfriend's condo while she ran around on some private errands, I opened a kitchen cupboard and pulled down a large ceramic jar labeled tea. What I found inside was a stash of her White House high-level security passes, cards, and lanyards, and clearance paperwork, which revealed her connection to a famous political figure. Story 79. A contractor friend of mine used to be CEO of a publicly listed company, rang the bell at NYSE, did investor presentations in London, Dubai, China, Tokyo, just that know of. His company ended up going under, and he decided he wanted to move home and run a small construction business like his dad did. Now he hangs out with us blue-collar schmucks and is known as one of the most honest, hardworking, humble guys in the business. Great guy. Never talks about his jet-setting past unless someone else brings it up. I'm not the one surprised because I knew him back then, but other people always are. Story 80. I work customer service, and my work persona has been mistaken for various flavors of fundamental Christian before because I only wear dresses or skirts to work, have long hair, don't wear makeup, and am almost over-the-top sweet. Here's an F in chat for all the whiplash people who met me at work, got when I added them on socials, and they saw I'm openly bisexual, dabble in illicit substances, and model private pictures for artists. Story 81. They moved across this country running from the cops. Then I ran away from home to them, and they took us shopping, and we filled cart after cart. They stole it. I was 15, and I'm not sure how old I was when it all sunk in. Maybe I always knew, and I didn't care. Anyway, I didn't keep in touch. They could be in jail. I could be in jail as an accomplice. Story 82. They have quiet BPD, aka discouraged subtype of BPD. Some refer to it as high-functioning BPD. Knew them for a decade, 3 years of a push-pull cycle. The friendship finally ended last year. It took me years to figure it out. My feelings for my friend blinded me of my objectivity towards them. The combination of that and their ambiguity mixed messages created a weird dynamic that ultimately ended the friendship. I wish we could have resolved our differences in a more amicable way. Story 83. My dad is a very sociable guy and makes friends everywhere he goes. He's also very resilient and headstrong. But recently, he told me about the time he passed out from stage fright during a seminar he had to give at his first job. Never in a million years would I have guessed he suffered from stage fright. Story 84. One of my friends adopted her grandson at birth, as her daughter was a teenager when she got pregnant. She never told her grandson that his sister was really his biological mother. He found this out after submitting his DNA to one of those websites after my friend had passed away. Really tore him up that she never told him the truth. He distanced himself from the whole family because he felt like they lied to him for 27 years. Story 85. My old band director from high school went to jail for being a pedophile because he preyed on a girl in band. I quit in 10th grade, but there's still a part of me that wonders, could it have been me? I doubt it. That man disliked my guts. But also, if the other band directors were in on it. Story 86. A former colleague was a boxing fight fixer scammer. He was a big Welsh lad, but his fighting record was super shoot. He would regularly come into the office all fudge up. For the number of fights he fought, he only a small number of wins. However, turns out he could take a hit without really getting hurt, and his endurance was excellent. His wins were when his odds were high, as his had lost previous fights and his friends made huge bets. He cared nothing for the art of boxing, he just wanted money. Story 87. When my mom was a kid, my grandma had a boyfriend from church. She was married to my grandpa at the time, and for almost 60 years until he died. My grandmother was so traditional in so many senses about being a proper lady that it blew me away. What's even more crazy, my mom was like, yeah, we knew. Pretty sure grandpa did too. My mom thinks this is why my grandpa decided one day no more going to church, that they should spend Sundays at home as a family. My mom told me this recently while we were tipsy on a vacation. I need to drink with my mom more often. My grandma passed away many years ago. I am not sure my mom would have told me if grandma was still alive. Story 88. My uncle passed away living as a hoarder who didn't bathe. He didn't even sleep on a bed, he slept on the floor. When we were taking over his estate, we looked at his bank statements, and he was a multimillionaire stock trader. Hundreds of thousands of shares of Tesla, Nvidia, Apple, and others. He had always talked about stock trading, and my husband actually emailed him, and they discussed stocks quite a bit over the years. My uncle had talked about someday buying a house in this really nice part of the Bay Area. It's strange and sad how he died, and he could have bought a few very nice houses in a nice part of the Bay Area. Anyway, now my mom is using the money to buy houses and renovate the house I grew up in. Story 89. I worked with a guy who was kind of a male body part. He said he played in the NFL but got hurt. This is before the internet, so I didn't have anywhere to look except newspapers. He wasn't listed on the roster for the team he said he played for, and he never provided any evidence other than his word. I mocked him relentlessly, and nobody believed him. Years later, I was watching ESPN, and a story about that year's NCAA Football Hall of Fame inductees was on. Although it wasn't him that was inducted, he was prominently featured as a teammate of the guy who was pro in college. I felt kind of bad, but the guy was a male body part. I called my old friends from that job and told them to turn on ESPN, and we laughed. Story 90. Years ago, my BF and I were friends with a couple who were intense swingers, like they belonged to several clubs and traveled to different states to pursue their hobby. They were neighbors, and we frequently went out to dinner, movies, etc. Didn't find out until after they moved away. Story 91. I discovered that a young lady very close to my family was married with her brother. She had been adopted when a few months old and spent years trying to find out who were her natural parents. When she found out, she met with her brother, and after a while they married. Don't accuse or scream. This has been a very happy and successful story. They have now a wonderful kid. I wish them happiness for the rest of their life. Story 92. Friends of the family took DNA test. The twins found out they had different fathers. I asked the mom about it. She just said, yeah, I guess they have different fathers. She was 80 when I asked her, and she didn't care. The twins have 5 siblings. The male twin doesn't look like any of his siblings. Story 93. My aunt was the pillar of the earth. Church every Sunday, kind to everyone, never a cross word about anyone. Literally saw her get upset one time, and it was more like a minor inconvenience. Pretty much submissive to my uncle. She passed away first in 2016, and then my uncle followed in 2018. In 2020, I went on FB and saw my cousin post a pic of him. My 2 other cousins, his brothers, and a woman he called my sister. Would have been fine, but my aunt and uncle only had 3 kids, all boys. Well, I guess my aunt had a daughter that she gave up for adoption as an infant. Literally gave birth and got in the car and drove cross county to California where she met my uncle. We were shocked. Never ever would have suspected it. And we all know there is no way my uncle knew, because he would never have accepted one. We are talking like 1957, where that was unheard of. My cousin said my aunt would ask them if they ever wanted a sister, but never thought anything of it. We still don't know who the father was, but my aunt was a nurse back in the day, so we are thinking maybe a doctor. The sister's birth certificate is blacked out where father is named. The only one alive at the time of us finding out was my dad, and he said he knew nothing about it. And even though my aunt and my mom were close sister-in-laws, this is my dad's side of the family, we don't think my mom knew either, because love her to passing, but my girl loved to gossip. So yeah, there it is. The last person we would ever expect to have a secret child absolutely had one. Story 94. He had child-adult content on his computer. He was one of my high school teachers. It came out right after I graduated, just at the first outbreak of COVID. There was a court case, but the charges were stayed for some fudge reason. I never would have suspected. He was a nice guy. He was the kind of teacher who cared, legitimately cared. I guess he cared a little too much. He's no longer a teacher. Still has his license, though. Never want to see that son of a meanie again. Story 95. The older man that's a regular at my cafe. We trade bits of collected wisdom back and forth, and often he just sits there talking about life and his wife with a glinting smile. One day he explained how he keeps so serene, his training from when he wielded a flamethrower in Vietnam. Story 96. They have a serious gambling addiction, which is on the verge of tearing his family apart. I've helped him financially in the past because I thought he was just struggling, but I've since learned he's in a cycle of gambling, getting into debt, consolidating the debt, then using the cleared credit cards to get into debt and consolidating them again, and now he's ran out of options. I'm furious at him because it impacts me. I'm not going to explain, but I'm also feeling so sorry for him because he's not gambling for fun. It's a serious addiction, and every day is hell for him. He wakes up in the night panicking and struggling to breathe. I'm going to help him again, but it's conditional that he gets help more professional than I can offer. Story 97. One of my former teacher's theater directors groomed a minor online and got extradited to another state on 13 felony counts. That came out of nowhere earlier this year and still horrifies me because we didn't have any inkling of anything like that from him. Our other director had married a former student, twice actually, so we were careful around him, but turns out they're both predators. Sigh. Story 98. I was thinking about this the other day. Back when I was in high school, early Dolores, one of my best friends told me he was grounded, and when I asked why he said I'm gay, to which I replied, no, you're not, completely surprised that his mom would lie about him being gay so she could ground him. It took me a second to realize he really was gay. I should say his mom was just shocked, and he was almost immediately ungrounded. Story 99. Found out my boyfriend had a PhD after dating him for 6 months. He isn't in that field any longer, and didn't feel the need to ever mention it to me. I found out because there was a textbook in the house that had the author's name the same as his, and I said, wow, what a coincidence. And then I found out he wrote it. Story 100. This has to do with my grandma's boyfriend after she divorced my grandpa. I only met him once, and he wasn't in great health. Anyway, he died after a year or two of them being together. I had always been told that he just got sick and passed away. Well, after my own parents divorced, my dad told me what really happened was that he blew his brains out on the front lawn of their house. Apparently, he had left his wife to be with my grandma. His wife was devastated and slit her wrists in the bathtub and died. He evidently was ridden with guilt over that and eliminated himself sometime later. I haven't told my mom that I know what really happened. Story 101. When I was in college, I worked part-time with a quiet older gentleman in a warehouse for about 2 years. I never had any problems with him, and I learned a lot about managing a warehouse while there. After I left, I found out from an ex-coworker that he had spent 10 years in jail for beating his own son up and turning him into a paraplegic. He had been out of jail for less than 2 years when I started working with him. I never had any idea. Story 102. I played drums for belly dancers in a Greek restaurant when I was younger. Turns out the really nice old guy who was teaching me how to play was a WW2 veteran. His nickname was Sergeant Egypt because his parents were Egyptian. Anyhow, I told him one day I had enlisted in the Marine Corps, and he lit up with a huge smile. He congratulated me and shared that he was in Patton's Third Army during the Battle of the Bulge. The crazy part is when he told me that one day 2 German soldiers came out of the woods to surrender to him. He said they had their hands up, and they were both SS. He looks at me and goes, and do you know what I did next? I shot them, and I pissed in their eyes. He said it with a laugh and a smile. Who would have known this kind, energetic old man in his 90s had executed 2 SS soldiers? Story 103. Found out my dad violation my childhood guy best friend's stepmom when she was high. He's got dementia, and I am estranged from him because he was in and out of my life. I'm his only child. As far as I know, no one's popped up out of the woodworks, and I have a large nosy family who would have found someone by now. It's been years since I spoke to him, but I found this out after reconnecting with this guy. First phone call, he says, how's your dad? If I ever see him, I'm eliminate him on sight. Like, darn, wow, what? I was shocked, but also my dad, odd guy, very, very charismatic and charming and great first impression, but crazy and angry at the drop of a dime and addicted to escapism. I believe my friend. Story 104. My mom told me several years ago that my uncle's first wife went missing, and she was pretty sure he eliminated her and either dumped her body in the ocean, we live on the coast, or threw her body in the incinerator at work. My grandfather, their stepfather, worked for the sheriff's office at the time and helped keep the police from looking further into the case by convincing everyone she ran off and left her 2 young children behind. My mom said everyone believed this BC small gifts would show up in the mail on the kids' birthdays each year, but she was very sure my uncle was the one mailing them. Also found out his second wife was 16 when he married her at almost 30. I was pretty shocked realizing the nice uncle that always brought the ham to Christmas dinner was a murderer and a pedo. Story 105. 3 of my closest friends had a casual group scene thing going for a little while. 2 of them were in a relationship already and are now engaged. One of them told me a few weeks after it started. It was surprising because my male homie is straight. The other male homie is bi. Story 106. Not someone I knew very well, but I was doing a summer internship many years ago, and we were encouraged to get coffee with the people we worked with one-on-one to ask for career advice and guidance. I Googled one of the women I was meeting with and found out her brother committed one of the worst mass shootings in U.S. history. This was only 2 years afterwards, too. I obviously never let her know I knew, but it was hard to believe this friendly, smiling woman I work with had to bear that burden. Story 107. Someone I went to elementary and middle school with told me that he was deployed to Afghanistan, had 38 confirmed eliminate, some being children. He said, "What are you supposed to do when they come out of